Hello and welcome back, or if you're new here then welcome to my channel. Today I'll be going through all of the books that I read in the month of October, and I read 7 books and listened to 1 audiobook, so I'll be going through all of those. I'll talk about roughly what the plot was about but without giving away much spoilers, and then my own opinion of the book with some rating. The books that I read this month, I kind of went down a theme of wanting them to be like autumny, horror-y, gothic, etc., given that it was the month of Halloween. So a lot of these books are some kind of, they're either like horror-y or they're spooky or gothic or cozy autumnal books. So that's kind of the theme here. I found it quite interesting to read so many kind of books that were for the season because I've not really done that before, and I actually really enjoyed it. I especially enjoyed reading the cozy autumnal book because it was just so sweet and cozy, and I had a hot chocolate and a blanket, and it was so lovely. But anyway, let's go through all of the books that I read this month. So the first book that I read was Anatomy, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz. As I said, when going through the plot, I'll try not really give anything away. Most of it will either be covered in the blurb or in the kind of start of the book, so it won't really be giving much away. So this book is set in Edinburgh. Big tick for me being Scottish. I really enjoy books that are set in Scotland in the year 1817. And it follows this girl, her name is Hazel, and she is like a member of high society. She wants to become a surgeon, but being in the 1800s, women weren't really allowed to be surgeons. So she has this, I guess, unattainable goal, and she also has to keep up appearances because she's functioning in high society, and because she's a girl, she doesn't get the money from like her family. She needs to still marry into money, so she is basically been betrothed to her cousin since she was really young, which was really weird to read, but I understand it was in the 1800s and in high society, I guess that was kind of like a normal thing. But anyway, it was still kind of weird. The book follows Hazel as she tries to become a surgeon, and she does it through kind of like weird means. I don't want to say much other than, I guess this is kind of near the start, so not giving much away. She does sneak into a lecture to watch a new medical procedure being carried out, and she absolutely loved it and then wants to go for lessons, but obviously faces some issues with this because she is a woman. And then she goes through kind of like means of performing autopsies on dead bodies, but illegitimately like gets them herself. And thankfully she does meet someone who is a gravedigger, and his name is Jack. So Jack and Hazel meet when she is sneaking into the lecture, and she figures out that he is a gravedigger and then approaches him for him to bring some bodies to her for her to be able to perform her autopsy so that she can learn enough to be able to become a surgeon. The book had obviously a romance between these two characters. It's kind of advertised here, a love story, and it's full of romance, etc. The romance fell a little bit flat, but I did appreciate that the romance was like central to the plot. Sometimes romance in a book is just kind of like there for the sake of it, but it was central to the plot of the book, but it just wasn't really explored. I wasn't really rooting for them that much. It kind of gave insta-lovey, even though it wasn't. I don't know, they just didn't really know each other that well, but acted like they did, and that just kind of weirded me out a little bit. But yeah, the romance was central to the plot, but fell a little bit flat. The main girl was a little bit annoying, and I understand that it was the 1800s, and I understand that she was doing things that weren't conventional, but the whole thing of not like other girls just annoyed me. I hate that. I hate that in reality, so I hate that trope in books when people are like, I'm not like other girls. But I do understand she was paying someone to dig up dead bodies so she could perform autopsies on them. So she wasn't like other girls, but I didn't, she wasn't like other people. But I still didn't really like that. It kind of annoyed me a little bit. The worst thing about this book, I think, is that the blurb covers like half of the story. And that bothered me because I read the blurb, and sometimes I do go into books blind, but I had actually read the blurb and then I got halfway through the book and was like, nothing has happened really out with the blurb. But I think that is an issue with the blurb rather than the story itself. So I would recommend going in blind. I've told you a little bit, but I've not even gone into as much depth as the blurb does. I'd recommend going in blind if you're wanting to read this book, because it was a bit frustrating that half of the book was the blurb. I think the pacing of the book was fine, so it wasn't an issue with pacing as to why the blurb covered so much. But yeah, I'd say that was like the number one annoying thing about this book. But yeah, some of the pros of this book, because I feel like I have only gone through some of the cons there. The writing style is great and easy to read and immersive. It is a page turner. It's a historical fiction book that sets the scene really well. I don't know if it's just because I know Edinburgh that I felt I could picture it really well, or if it was her descriptions of the setting. But either way, I found it really immersive where it was set. I thought the ending was really interesting for the book. It wasn't what I was expecting, and I did enjoy it, and it kind of set the book up for there's a sequel. It could have ended with this. There doesn't need to be a sequel. Like, you could just read this and not read the second one. But there is a sequel, and the end of the book both concludes the story and also opens it up for a sequel, which I think is really difficult to do, so I did enjoy that. So this was overall a 3-star read for me. As I said, the pros, it was immersive, it was set really well, the pacing was decent enough, but it just kind of fell flat for the romance being a bit and some of the characters and the characterization in the book being a bit icky. But I did enjoy this book, and it is a good book. For me, 3 stars means that it's good, but I'm waiting for you to be great, you know. But I would recommend for like a kind of gothic-y, chill historical fiction vibey book to read if you're looking for that. The next book that I read was actually a buddy read with my sister, and it's the first time I've done a buddy read with her, so it was really cute. That was Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerry Maniscalco. This book, I enjoyed it more at first before my sister pointed something out. And she pointed something out, and then I started noticing it, and this is a cookbook with a side of Kingdom of the Wicked. Cooking is mentioned so much in this book, and I understand that it's a central part of the main character's life because her family own a restaurant, and she loves to cook. But it's mentioned so much, like into depth recipes, which was annoying. Anyway, I feel like I have to mention the cooking even when I'm going about the plot of this book because it felt so central to it. But this is about a girl who, her and her twin sister are in this family of witches. This isn't spoiling anything because it is in the blurb, but her sister dies and she's trying to figure out who killed her because it looks like it was a murder. So she ends up trying to contact people from the underworld, i.e. demons, to try and figure out what has happened because she is pretty sure that it is linked to the underworld, as she found some kind of like weird things in her sister's possessions that point to the fact that it might be. So she contacts them, and then she meets Wrath, and Wrath carried the whole book, I'm not gonna lie. But other than that, I'm not really wanting to say much because I don't want to spoil the story for if you're wanting to read it. But that's the premise it builds up to in the book, and it's basically her and this demon working together to try and figure out who killed her sister, because he also has a stake in it as well because of the reason that her sister was killed. I'm not going to go into anything else without it becoming a spoiler. I don't want it to be a spoiler. But yeah, as I said, this book, too much mention of cooking. There was no need to mention cooking that much. Like, there was no need. Anyway, the story was interesting, and as I said, Raph did carry the book. His character was really interesting, and I think I'll probably continue the series to try and figure out what's happening with the main character and Wrath, etc. But there was a lot of unanswered questions in this book, and I don't know if that was because there is a sequel and it's to get you to keep reading. the series or if these questions will remain unanswered. There were some things that happened that just felt very far-fetched, and I know it's a supernatural book where there's witches and demons, so that's already far-fetched, but some of the stuff just didn't really seem realistic. Like, there were things that were revealed throughout the book where it just didn't really make sense. There was no reason for it to have been hidden information and things like that. It just felt a little bit weird and clunky that way, but I understand why it was done that way, because obviously if they already knew, that would spoil the book, but it still just kind of felt a bit meh, unrealistic. The pacing was kind of weird, so it starts off with a bang. It starts off with a murder happening and trying to figure out what happens, and then it's kind of slow and about cooking for a good 100 pages, and then the end is super fast, where it's like nothing really happens, and then she meets Wrath, and then all these things start happening. So the kind of weird pacing where it was like fast, slow, fast, and it just felt a bit weird that way. The ending was both good and bad to me. I think the ending did bring it up a little bit. I'd say it probably would have been like a 2.5 stars, 2.5 stars without the end of the book, but the end of the book did set it up really well for me wanting to read the next book. Like, I do kind of want to know what happened. I'm not like at the edge of my seat and need to read the next book, but I would quite like to figure out like what happens, because it looks like it's going to like a new setting and things like that. So yeah, I'd say it was a 3-star for me overall. The characters were interesting, the plot was interesting once I got into it, trying to figure out what was going on. Some of the things made a lot of sense and I was like, oh no way, and then other things just were very far-fetched and strange. Like I said, the pacing was weird, and the main girl in it, she kind of annoyed me at first, but she does undergo some character development and becomes less annoying by the end, so I did appreciate that there was character development throughout the story as well. And I also understand why she was a bit annoying. Her sister died. Reasonable. But yeah, I'd say don't rush to read this book, but if you're looking for a fantasy series that has witches and demons in it, then I'd say probably read it. But I can't really say much until I read the next two, because as I said, there are currently a lot of unanswered questions, and if these don't get answered, then the series is a little bit of a flop. But if it does, then it's just a book setting up for the rest of the series. So that's Kingdom of the Wicked. The next book is a book that I listened to, and it is my first ever audiobook, and that was I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy, and oh my gosh, 5 stars. Couldn't have been better. I was skeptical about listening to a book rather than reading it, because the reason I read, I love like the physical act of reading and getting immersed in a story that I'm reading, and that being the one thing that I'm focusing on. But I decided to listen to an audiobook because Spotify, if anyone doesn't know, actually Spotify, if you have premium, then you get a set number of listening hours to audiobooks per month now, included in your premium at no extra cost. So I was like, I might as well try it, and that's exciting. And I knew I'd wanted to read I'm Glad My Mum Died, but I just hadn't got around to it, and then I noticed that it was narrated by the author, and I thought, what better way to consume a memoir than to listen to the narrator of the book, the person that happened to reading it out. So I was like, let's try it. I feel like if I'm going to like an audiobook, then I'll probably like this, and oh my gosh, listen to it. Do not pick the book up and read it, listen. The things that happened to her through her own words spoken was something else. Like, you could hear the emotion in her voice as she was saying it, and it was really interesting, the book, to cover topics such as her starring in iCarly. And I remember loving the show, but obviously it was difficult to be on a TV show that you would never know unless you're on it, especially as a child, so it was quite hard listening to it. And she mentioned some scenes in the series that I remembered watching, and now knowing how she felt during those was like heartbreaking, to be honest. She had an abusive mother, so there is abuse discussed in the book, and also eating disorders and mental health issues. So if those are like triggers for you that you don't think it would be good to listen to or read about, then I would avoid the book. But otherwise, I would 100% recommend it. It was so interesting, and yeah, it was beautiful, really, to be honest. I can't fault it, especially listening to it. I think it's the only time I'll ever prefer listening rather than reading a book, but I am going to try other memoirs, I think. So if you have any recommendations for memoirs that are narrated by the author, then please let me know, and I will listen to them and see if this was just a fluke or if I am now an audiobook girly, which would be so nice because I know a lot of people who do listen to audiobooks and they absolutely love it. I didn't think I'd be able to pay attention because my mind wanders a lot, but I actually was super immersed in this. Like, I loved it. Okay, so on to the next book that I read, and that was for a book club that I'm part of, and that is The City and the City by China Miéville. I didn't look up the pronunciation, and I do this every time, and I should have, but anyway. The City and the City is a book about two cities, the city and the city, that are geographically in the same place, but they need to act like the other place doesn't exist. So they're geographically like one place, but they're split due to some kind of, I think probably social aspect. It's actually never revealed, and that's one of the things I didn't like about this book. But yeah, they coexist together, these two cities, and then a murder happens, and a guy who is a police officer in one of the cities needs to figure out what happened to her, and it appears that it involves things that have happened in both cities. So he needs to go to the other city and try and get some clues and information from there too. So without spoiling what happens in the book, that's kind of like a rough premise of what the book is about. Very intriguing. I really enjoyed it at first. So like the first part of the book was really interesting. It doesn't really explain the stuff that it's talking about, but as it goes on with the context, you actually start to understand what's going on, and that was really nice. It was weird, but at first it felt weird in a good way. But by the end, for me, it was just weird for weirdness sake. Like, a lot of things was left unexplained, and as much as things like that could be left up to the interpretation of the reader, I felt like a lot of it just wasn't explained because they didn't have a reason for it, maybe? Or, I don't know, just, like I said, weird for weirdness sake. The murder that happened was really interesting. The start, as I said, was great. The way that it's described these cities was amazing. The terminology used without description that you then understood what it meant was really good. It had so much promise. The murder, him travelling to the other city, I was super psyched for him going to the other city and seeing what it was like there. But it just kind of ended up falling flat. And at a point, it just kind of got a bit boring, dull and repetitive. And then at the end, the ending felt super, super rushed. So it got into it quite well and then fell flat and then really rushed the ending. And the ending wasn't really satisfying either. The ending just kind of felt like they heaped it all together to end the book. And it wasn't like putting all the dots together. It just kind of went, here's a kind of semi-packaged up ending, here you go. So I didn't enjoy that, but if you like weird books with a lot open to interpretation and a lot of unanswered questions, then this book could be for you. So I sometimes like some books to have a bit left up to the reader, but it was a bit too much left up to me for me to enjoy it. But if you're a huge fan of that, then I'd recommend it. And for the premise of the book alone, and also the interesting start of the book, I'd say maybe give it a shot. For me, it was like a 2.5/3 stars. It's weird because on Goodreads you can only give full stars, so I typically round up and I give it 3 stars, but it's probably maybe like 2.5-ish for me because it just kind of fell flat at a point. But it was okay. I'm not upset I read it. Like, I'm glad I read it, but I wouldn't like jump at the chance to read another one of their books. But yeah, that's The City and the City. The next book that I read was a non-fiction book, and that was 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. I have read Homo Deus and Sapiens and absolutely adored them, which is why I wanted to get this book. He is like one of my favourite non-fiction authors of all time. But enough about that. The premise of the book is, as it says on the tin, essentially 21 lessons for the 21st century. So the book goes through 21 different chapters that have a lesson to be applied to life in the 21st century. His other book, Sapiens, goes way back into the past for how humanity formed and how we got to where we are today. And Homo Deus is about like how humanity will be in centuries to come. So this was interesting, kind of bridging the gap between those two and it being applicable to now. This was pre-COVID, so it was very interesting as well because a lot of the things that are discussed are kind of different now because of COVID. So that was interesting, and there are also some things that are touched on this book that are very relevant and prevalent now. So again, very weird and interesting. For me, some of the chapters were really good and interesting, but other things were a bit repetitive. My favourite part, I personally work in the field of data, and it was talking about how data and AI and such technology and how it affects us today and how it will probably affect us in the years to come, from things even like job market to just making decisions on a daily basis for who you'll marry, what car to buy and such, and how much we might end up relying on such services. So I did find it really interesting where there was concepts discussed that are relevant to my field of work, and I was like, interesting. A lot of ethical things were also covered, which I really enjoyed because I really enjoy ethics, especially related to biotechnology specifically, but also technology in general. So that was really interesting. A lot of the things were things that I'm already interested in that were talked about, but it goes from everything from like technology, religion, geography, war, terrorism, everything. It goes through so many different things and kind of things for how you can, I guess, like change how you live now based off of what you've learned. But I'd say it's mostly just kind of like letting you know what's going on, because I can understand kind of like not really knowing what's going on. But yeah, I'd say it was good, but nowhere near as good as his other books. But I guess it serves a different purpose. So for me, it was like 3.5/4 stars. I don't know if should I give it like 3.75 then. So I'll give the City and the City 2.75 and this 3.75 because it's my channel. I can rate however I want. I can do 3.685 if I want. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I'd say 3.75 stars for this. If you're looking for a non-fiction book, I wouldn't recommend this straight away. But if you're looking for specifically a non-fiction book about things that are happening in the here and now, then I probably would recommend it. But I'd read Sapiens first because that book is incredible. The next book that I read is a book talk and booktube and bookstagram sensation, and that is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. Gilmore being the surname is interesting because I've never seen Gilmore Girls, but I've been told that this book screams Gilmore Girls, so I think that pen name is specifically to be like Gilmore Girls-y. But yeah, knowing what I know about Gilmore Girls, I can tell the inspiration that was taken from it for this book. But yeah, this is basically a story about a girl who flees the city because of her boss who died due to stress. So she's like, I'm going 100 miles an hour, I'm stressed out, this has been a kind of wake-up call. So she moves to this small town where her aunt owns this coffee shop and has retired, so she passes the coffee shop on to her niece, and that coffee shop is Pumpkin Spice Cafe. So she goes to this small town, and she'd been to it a handful of times when she was younger because she'd be visiting her auntie, but she's lived in a big city for so long now. But while she's there, she opens the cafe, meets the people there, and grows and learns and things like that. So very low stakes, very chill book, like nothing happens almost. But I read this in a day. I read this in one day. I couldn't put it down. Almost nothing happened at all. It was just cute, cozy vibes. It was the perfect like autumnal read. I really enjoyed it. It was like Hallmark. It was like a Hallmark movie. It was like a cookie cutter book the only thing I can relate to is like the Christmas Hallmark movies where it's all the same plot. The same thing happens, but you still enjoy it, you know, you still want to watch it. That was basically what this book was. It was very much a mood read for me, and I'm a mood reader, so I really enjoyed it. But if you're in the mood for something that's like a serious, groundbreaking book with lots of character development and themes covered that are like big and interesting, and I don't know, this is not the book for you. If you're here for just like vibes of just like chill, cozy, I want to get snuggled under a blanket with a hot chocolate and just kind of like escape for a little bit into this cute, cozy little world, then this is absolutely perfect. It's cliche, it's cheesy, it's cute. I really, really liked it. In terms of ratings, I struggle to rate a book just on vibes, so I do also need to take into consideration things like the writing style, if it was actually a good book and such, but the vibes are contributing in there somewhere. So for me, this was a 3-star book. If I was going on vibes alone, it would be a 4-star book. If I was going on plot and premise of the book alone, it would be a 2-star book. So like, take that as you will. They kind of balanced out to be a 3-star for me. So I would definitely recommend, if you're looking for cute, cozy book for the autumn season, but if you're looking for a really good read, then do not read this book. Okay, so the next book is The Spirit Engineer by A.J. West, and I did actually buy this for the cover because it is super cute. And thankfully the premise did sound interesting to me at the time as well. So this book follows this guy who is a skeptic in terms of things that are like paranormal and supernatural. He is an engineer. I'm also an engineer. Maybe a slight reason as to why I bought it. But anyway, he's an engineer, so he's like a man of science who just kind of shuns the idea of that. But something happens that he then goes to a seance and starts to have his perception skewed on this, so weird things kind of start happening, and he's like trying to be like, no, it's not because of that, but as time goes on he starts to think maybe there is something behind this, maybe there are some supernatural forces at work. So I don't want to give much away. I feel like saying more might give away what happens in the book beyond what's kind of covered in the blurb. But this is a historical fiction set just after the Titanic sank. So a lot of society as well is also looking to supernatural kind of like, not explanations for stuff, but some comfort for the supernatural because a lot of people have obviously passed away. But yeah, this book, I love historical fiction books, but I did find it a bit of a slog to get through. It was quite slow. Yeah, it was creepy, which I enjoyed. I was looking for a kind of creepy, gothic-y horror read for October, so I did like that it was creepy. And the premise was interesting enough. I would say it's more centered around character development rather than the plot. It's more character driven, especially the main character, as I said, who was a skeptic who starts to maybe start believing it. His character development is the biggest thing, I think. I have actually just recently learned that this is based on a true story, which has completely changed my perspective on everything, and I want to look up what happened to this guy because yeah, poor guy. Anyway, I'd say go in more looking for that. I went in with very different expectations. I went in like thinking it'd mostly be centering around the seances and stuff, which it did. It was central to the plot, but I'd say the plot itself was very repetitive, but it was more so the character driven development within the book that this was centered around, and it just wasn't what I was expecting, so it felt a little bit flat for me. I think if you go in with a different expectation, then maybe it would be better, but for me I'd say this was 3 stars. I think the ending was really good. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the character development, as I mentioned, but the plot was very slow at first, and sometimes things happened that felt very sudden with not much build up, which was good in some aspects, but it also felt a little bit like strange, the pacing in that sense. But yeah, it was good. It was kind of boring at points, but it was still like a decent book. I wouldn't like run to go and read it, but it's like decent enough, but it took me a really long time to read it considering how short it is. I think it's like 300 pages or something, and it took me so long. I felt like it was such a slog, and I think it's just the writing style of it. At points the writing style was really good and immersive, and I found it quite like almost lyrical to read, but that was only when I'd been reading it for a decent chunk of time. When I would first pick it up, it felt very clunky and weird. Some historical fiction books are like that though, even though I read a lot of historical fiction, but most of the ones that I read aren't as clunky, and at points it just felt very, I don't know, a very mid book, I'd say. The final book that I read was actually a debut book by a debut author that he sent to me, and that is Triangle by David Nance. This is like a sci-fi book set in a small town in America centered around a high school, and it's kind of like invasion of the body snatchers with a like but a bit different. So basically it's these two guys who notice that their school has been overrun by aliens and are trying to figure out how to save them. The book was actually, I think the author and the book, the series in general, because this is actually going to be, I think, a trilogy, is very promising for this being a first book. It was really good actually. The setting was actually good and interesting. It was set in the 90s around the school, and the perspective given was very interesting. It was written from these kind of like uncool stoner kid perspective, which was interesting because I feel like normally books like that are like from, I guess, more like a popular kid's point of view, or like, I don't know. I just felt like a very interesting point of view that I've not read before. I've never really read it from these stoners' point of view. It was bizarre, but in a good way. The writing style was really good and easy. It was well paced, and I will be looking to read the sequel. However, there were a few things that I feel like could have been improved upon. For example, there was this romance that happened, and it was between these two people with a bit of an age gap, and it wouldn't seem like a lot when you're older, but she was in high school and he had like a job. He was maybe like 4 years older than her. It just felt a little bit weird and icky to me. But as I said, when you're older it's not a huge age gap, but it just felt a bit like weird. So I wasn't a huge fan of that. But the girl that was on the receiving side of that romance, she was great. I really liked her character, but I felt like a lot of the other female characters kind of lacked depth and were just kind of surface level. But she was really good. I really liked her, so there is promise there definitely for giving more development to the side characters. The guy that was involved in that romance as well, so those two are side characters. He was really good and interesting. Like, I enjoyed when the story was told from more his point of view. The book was like multi-POV, which I really enjoyed as well. I enjoy books that are told from multiple points of view. There are a lot of unanswered questions in this book, and I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, if it'll be covered later, but there was a few things where it felt like they were only there to help push the plot along. There was like this specific character that was there that kind of popped in and out of it, and it felt like it was only to start the plot and keep it going, rather than for it to have much more meaning than that, and it felt a little bit strange and wasn't really explained. I'm not sure if it will be in the next book, so we'll see. I do find it difficult to review first books with questions unanswered because I'm never sure if it's something that will be covered later, but in terms of it being on its own, there's a lot of things that weren't covered that I would like to know, which I think just slightly made it a little bit less good for me. But I did still enjoy the book. I'd say it's probably like a 3/3.5 stars for me. I'd say 3.5, especially given that this is their first book, and I would be keen to read the next one and figure out what's happening, because the ending of the book did set it up well for the next one, and I am intrigued to find out what happens. So that is every book that I read in October. Thank you so much for tuning in, and if you've already watched my November TBR video, you know that I have a lot of books to be getting through this month, so fingers crossed I actually managed to do it, and when I do my November wrap up there will be 10 plus books that I will be covering, so make sure to tune into that. I'm not stressed, you're stressed. Thank you, bye!